Okay, so in the last lab that we did, you started looking at plants, different characteristics that plants have. And in this lab, we're going to do a similar activity to what we did early on in the semester with the insects. So we're going to have some plants, and then we're going to look at certain binary characteristics and kind of use our plants to fill out a table of characteristics. And we're going to build on that. In next week's lab, we're going to create some family trees, some phylogenies, using the traits that we figure out in this lab. So it's a pretty simple lab. There's 3 steps to it. So the first step is to choose 5 different plants. And you can do this locally, so in your backyard, front yard, local environment. If it's impractical for you to do something like that, you can just choose 5 random plants you could research online. But ideally, pick some plants that you can look at closely and try as best you can to identify each species. Use the information that you learned in lecture. If you want to send me pictures, I can try and help you identify things. You don't necessarily have to identify it down to the species label. You could give it kind of a simple name like, a tall conifer tree or a moss or a grass. That's fine for our purposes here. So just some signifier name, choose 5 different species of plants that you can examine. That's the first step. Okay, so the second step is to come up with at least 10 binary traits that could be used to separate plant species, to tell them apart. If you remember when we were doing the lab and we're looking at different insects, you came up with binary traits. So they just fit into 2 categories. It's either this or it's that. And that's very useful for when you were going to create a family tree, which we're going to do in the lab next week. So you can do these traits based on what you observe. So you could do like the shape of a leaf. Is it round, kind of a very wide leaf, or is it more pointy and thin? You could look at the number of petals, which would be true if it was a flowering plant. Does it have less than 5 petals, or does it have 5 or more petals in the flower? You could look at the color of the leaf, is it light green or dark green? Are there spines on the plant, pointy spines? Is that present or absent? Some things don't necessarily obviously lend themselves as a binary trait, but you just create it as a binary trait. So you could do the height of the plant. So is it in total size smaller than 2 feet, or is it 2 feet or taller? Are the leaf veins parallel or nut-like? Those would all be traits you could observe in your 5 species that you're looking at. You can also use traits that you don't necessarily see, but that you could research. So you could know, like, for this group that the plant belongs to, is the dominant stage a sporophyte, or is it a gametophyte? It should be gametophyte, sorry. And then how is the sperm, is it packaged in this species? So is it packaged as pollen, or is it not packaged in pollen? Is it free swimming sperm? And is there vascular tissue? Is that present or absent? So the third step, once you have your 5 species and you have your 10 or more different characters, is to fill out a character matrix table. And I've uploaded an Excel document with this example table along with another tab where you can fill out your own table for your 5 plant species and 10 or more characters. So in this example here, I chose a moss, I'm not telling you specifically what species it is, a conifer tree, a grass, a dandelion, and an apple tree. So these are just some example traits you could use. So I did dominant stage. Is it gametophyte or sporophyte dominant? You see the moss would be gametophyte, everything else is sporophyte. The height of a full-grown plant. Moss and grass and dandelion were relatively small. Conifer tree and apple tree were taller. Leaf veins. So moss does not really have veins in their leaves. Conifer have needles, so it doesn't really apply to them. But for the grass, it has parallel leaf venation. Dandelion, apple tree have the nut-like spreading out leaf venation. And then does it produce a flower? So for moss and conifer, they do not produce flowers. for grass, dandelion, and apple tree, they would. So those are some example traits. So basically just fill out for your 10 characters, if you want to do a little bit more than 10, fill out that table, and that's where you're going to be uploading as your assignment. And I'll make that assignment where you can upload that document in a day or two. Okay, so that's the instructions. Not super complicated, but do your best with this, and then we're going to use the table that you create in next week's lab.